He gave me everything: money, power, my first million. Then I fell in love with the one woman he warned me about, and that's when the war began. Not a loud one. A quiet, ruthless, surgical war. The kind that ruins you before you even realize you've lost. Elliot Rivers was a nobody, just a lanky kid from Elgin, Illinois, with a second-hand laptop and a cracked phone screen. The kind of guy who always had a big idea but no one to back it. He'd sold vintage sneakers out of his trunk, flipped garage sale furniture on Facebook Marketplace, even tried reselling concert tickets until a cease and desist landed in his inbox. Nothing stuck. Until Henry Vance noticed him. Henry wasn't just rich. He was old money rich. The kind of man whose name didn't show up on social media, only in property records and hedge fund filings. He walked like someone who never had to run for anything. At 63, with silver hair that curled like cigarette smoke around his temples, Henry exuded a calm that Elliot mistook for wisdom, and maybe it was, in its own cruel way. They met at a private networking event where Elliot wasn't supposed to be. He'd borrowed a blazer 2 sizes too big and tagged along with a friend who owed him a favor. He drank water while others sipped $200 bourbon, and when Henry asked him what he did, Elliot told the truth, trying to get out of being broke. Henry laughed, and in that moment, something cracked open. He became Elliot's mentor. Quietly at first, book recommendations, occasional lunches at quiet restaurants on the north side. But soon, Elliot found himself in Henry's office, watching the city from a penthouse view, listening to the men dissect markets like they were operas and people like they were currency. "You don't make money off ideas," Henry told him one evening, pouring scotch into a glass that probably cost more than Elliot's rent. "You make money off timing. Ideas are like buses. There's always another one coming." Henry backed Elliot's first real venture, a real estate fund targeting distressed neighborhoods on the south side. It wasn't pretty, but it made money. Elliot got his first real suit, his first real office, his first invitation to places with valet parking. And through it all, Henry hovered, never loud, but always there. Always knowing. But the turning point wasn't a number on a spreadsheet. It was a woman. Her name was Irina. She was a Serbian-born architect with tired eyes and a voice that made men lean in closer. Elliot met her at a charity event, and unlike the plastic-smiled crowd that hovered near the bar, she looked like she didn't care who anyone was. She asked him a real question about one of his projects. Not a flirt. Not a test. Just a question he hadn't thought about. And just like that, Elliot was interested. Not in her body, at least not first. In her mind. The way she saw space and structure like living organisms, like neighborhoods had souls and needed to breathe. He started bringing her to meetings. She gave the team an edge, something poetic among the spreadsheets. And Henry noticed. "She's too elegant to be useful," he said once, offhandedly. "And you're getting too sentimental to be dangerous." Elliot laughed it off. But the words lingered. They lingered through the months as the fund doubled in size, as Irina and Elliot grew closer, late nights becoming early mornings, whispered jokes becoming shared silences. She moved into his condo in West Loop before they even said the word love out loud. And then came the dinner. It was supposed to be a celebration, new investors from Qatar, another round of funding, the sort of deal that would put Elliot's fund on the national map. Henry hosted it at his Lake Geneva estate, a sprawling, glass and stone behemoth perched like a crown above the water. Elliot brought Irina. It wasn't a calculated risk. He thought Henry would be gracious, maybe even impressed. But when she entered the room, something in Henry's expression changed. Just for a moment. A flicker. Like someone realizing a secret had been stolen. He was polite. Of course he was. But as the evening wore on, the old man got sharper. Less mentor, more predator. He asked Irina pointed questions, about ethics, aesthetics, even the profitability of her design firm. He challenged her, over and over, under the guise of conversation. And Elliot felt it, that cold draft through a door he hadn't realized was open. Something had shifted. After the guests left and the glasses were cleared, Henry asked to speak to Elliot alone. Just 5 minutes. Just like old times. They walked the stone path toward the garden, silence padding between their steps. Then Henry stopped and turned. "She'll ruin you," he said. Not angrily. Almost with pity. "She's the best thing that's happened to me," Elliot replied. Henry didn't blink. "Then you haven't happened to enough things yet." The wind rustled through the trees, as if the earth itself was unsure who to believe. For weeks after that night at Lake Geneva, Elliot tried to convince himself that nothing had changed. But things had changed. He could feel it in the way Henry stopped replying with his usual precision. No more Sunday morning emails with highlighted articles, no more late-night calls to kick the tires on an idea. The silence wasn't loud, it was strategic. Cold. Like a parent punishing a child by watching him drown from the shore. Elliot pushed harder. He doubled their development pipeline, pressed into riskier acquisitions, and leaned into Irina's ideas more than ever. She had an eye for spaces others dismissed, crumbling factories, forgotten warehouses, buildings so ugly they practically begged for rebirth. She saw beauty in places that scared investors. But Elliot didn't care. She made him believe they weren't just flipping real estate, they were reshaping the city. One morning, Irina stood barefoot in the kitchen, flipping through blueprints while toast burned in the background. She turned to him and said, "Why do you still need his approval?" He didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because he did. Henry wasn't just a backer. He was a symbol. Of order. Of control. Of a man who had conquered the mountain and carved a staircase into its side. Letting go of Henry felt like stepping off that staircase and climbing the cliff alone. But love makes us bold, or reckless. When the news came, it came from a junior analyst. Henry had moved $12 million out of Elliot's fund. Quietly. Over 3 weeks. No warning. No explanation. It was a surgical withdrawal, the kind that says more than any phone call ever could. Elliot tried to call. No answer. Not even a "we'll talk soon." Just the vacuum of finality. Still, he refused to panic. He had momentum. And more importantly, he had Irina. She was by his side through late nights and investor pitches, through zoning battles and city hearings. When the banks hesitated, she spoke up. When the designs stalled, she redesigned. They were building something that felt real, not just in bricks and steel, but in sweat and trust. Then came the invitation. A gala at the Art Institute. Black tie. Hosted by Henry's Foundation. Irina wanted to skip it. "It's a play," she said. "You're walking into a performance where the villain wrote the script." But Elliot needed to see Henry. Not to beg. Not even to ask why. Just to prove something, though he couldn't name what. They walked in hand, Irina in a navy silk gown that seemed to bend the light, Elliot in a tuxedo he hadn't worn since his first 7-figure closing. The room sparkled with wealth and whisper, old Chicago money that moved like ghosts between champagne flutes and curated laughter. Henry spotted them from across the room. His smile was as measured as ever, but something in his eyes was different. Like a man staring at a masterpiece he once owned and now sees behind glass. He approached. "Mr. Rivers. Miss Stojkovic." A nod to each, polite to the edge of insult. "The city seems smaller with you two in it." "Funny," Irina replied smoothly. "It used to feel bigger when you were the only one shaping it." There was a pause. Just long enough to make the silence uncomfortable. Henry's eyes didn't leave Elliot's. "She's clever," he said. "But cleverness burns fast. You'll find that out when the wind shifts." Elliot bristled. "Or maybe I'll find out that you underestimated us." Henry leaned in, his voice soft and heavy. "This isn't about underestimating. It's about understanding. Some people are built for loyalty. Others are built for lust. And sometimes, men can't tell the difference." Then he walked away. That night, Elliot didn't sleep. Neither did Irina. They sat on the balcony, the city lights pulsing below, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that unsettled him, not doubt. Not guilt. Something colder. "You've never told me what you were to him," she said suddenly. "What do you mean?" "Before me. Were you his prodigy, or something else?" Elliot blinked. "He was my mentor. But that's not the question I asked." He didn't respond. The silence wasn't intimate this time. It was accusatory. She stood up, letting the night wrap around her shoulders like a shawl. "Men like him don't burn bridges. They set traps. You think we're free of him, but we're walking in a maze he built." Elliot watched her disappear into the bedroom, unsure of what he feared more, Henry's revenge, or the fact that maybe, just maybe, it had already started. The following Monday began with a fire, not metaphorical, but real. A 3-alarm blaze in the shell of an old shipping terminal they were converting into luxury lofts. Smoke rose into the pale morning sky, black and deliberate. The structure was unsalvageable. By noon, the news had already made its rounds. Rivers' development project goes up in flames. Some anchor even called it symbolic. The fire inspector claimed faulty wiring. But Elliot knew better. The crew hadn't even started electrical work. It felt staged, like the kind of message you don't write with words. Irina didn't say much. Just stared at the photos like she was trying to solve a murder. By Friday, 2 more blows landed. A city permit was inexplicably revoked on another project, and a major lender, one they'd worked with for over a year, suddenly pulled out of a $9 million deal. No explanation. No callback. Just gone. And still, Henry said nothing. His silence hung over them like a prediction fulfilled. That weekend, Elliot finally did what he swore he wouldn't. He went back to Henry's office. No appointment. Just walked in like he used to, past the receptionist who gave him a look like he was the ghost of something already buried. Henry was there. Alone. Sitting behind the same oak desk, under the same portrait of Lake Geneva at dusk. Calm as always. "I'm not here to beg," Elliot said. "I'm here to ask, why burn it down? You made me." Henry leaned back, not surprised. "I didn't make you. I tested you. And you failed." "How?" "By confusing hunger with integrity. You started building temples to your own ambition. And then you fell in love with someone who sees you as a stepping stone." Elliot's jaw tightened. "You don't know her." Henry tapped the desk once, like a judge ending deliberation. "I know her better than you do." The words hung there. Something shifted in Elliot's stomach, cold and unfamiliar. "What does that mean?" Henry didn't answer. He just reached into his drawer and slid a thin envelope across the table. Inside, a series of bank transfers, dated over the past year. All traced back to a shell firm in Irina's name, one that had been quietly buying up parcels adjacent to Elliot's biggest projects. Parcels that, when you looked closer, strategically weakened his leverage in future development. She had been building a shadow map of his empire. One tile at a time. "Why?" Elliot whispered, his throat dry. Henry stood, slow and deliberate. "Because love doesn't compete with power, Elliot. It waits. Watches. And when the timing's right, it replaces you." He walked around the desk and placed a hand on Elliot's shoulder, gently. "You weren't betrayed by me," he said. "You were betrayed by thinking she chose you." Elliot left the office in a daze. The street felt tilted. People passed him by like actors in someone else's life. At home, Irina was in the kitchen, barefoot again, sipping wine and humming something old and Eastern European. The same woman who had taught him how to see neighborhoods with poetry was now part of a scheme he couldn't fully understand. He placed the envelope on the counter. She looked at it. Then at him. And for a long moment, neither of them moved. "I told you," she said finally. "Men like him don't set fires. They set mazes." Tears welled in Elliot's eyes, not because he was heartbroken, but because he finally realized the truth. The only thing worse than being used, is being used by someone you loved for something they believed in more. Irina didn't deny it. That was the worst part. She poured another glass of wine, the clink of glass against glass absurdly calm, and said, "You were always going to outgrow him. You just didn't see that I was growing, too." Elliot leaned against the wall like gravity had changed its mind. The document still lay open on the counter between them, damning and silent. "You could have told me," he said. His voice cracked, the kind of break that isn't about anger but mourning. "You could have said something, anything." Irina swirled the wine. "And you would have what? Chosen me over the men who made you." "You already did, Elliot. I just followed the logic." Her words cut like wires across flesh. She didn't look smug. She looked tired. Like betrayal had worn her down too, and that made it worse. She hadn't been manipulated, she'd calculated. "You were playing both sides," he said. She didn't blink. "No. I was playing mine." The silence between them stretched out, wide and wild. A canyon made of everything unsaid. Elliot walked out without another word. He didn't pack. Didn't slam the door. Just left. He spent the next few days in a hotel that reeked of bleach and lost business travelers. The minibar stayed untouched. The phone buzzed with messages, his assistant, his lawyer, investors asking about the fire, the funding freeze, whispers of litigation. But he barely answered. He wasn't grieving a relationship. He was grieving a worldview. How do you rebuild when you don't know what was ever real? On the third night, he finally called someone who wasn't expecting it, Jesse Thorne. They'd started in the same investor circle years ago. Jesse had always been scrappy, more cautious, more conservative. He'd never grown as fast as Elliot, but he'd never taken money from Henry either. And now, maybe, that was the smart play. They met in a quiet bar in Logan Square. Jesse nursed a whiskey, Elliot stuck with water. Neither of them talked for 5 full minutes. Then Jesse said, "So, it's true. The fire. The permits. Irina." Elliot didn't argue. "I thought you were untouchable," Jesse continued. "Guess that was part of the illusion, huh?" Elliot stared at his glass. "I thought building things made you stronger. Turns out it just makes your fall harder to watch." Jesse leaned in, voice low. "You're not done. You've still got your name. Your vision. But you need to make a move he wouldn't see coming." "Like what?" "Like building something without anyone else's money. No partners. No strings." Elliot laughed, bitter and dry. "On what capital?" Jesse took a breath. Then slid a folder across the table. "I've been sitting on a land bank just south of Pilsen. Ugly. Forgotten. But it's clean. Undervalued. And it's yours, if you can do it without razzle-dazzle. No headlines. Just work." Elliot blinked. "You're offering me a way back in." "I'm offering you a clean start. You're not the only one Henry stepped on." By dawn, Elliot was pacing the cracked sidewalk of the property. The air smelled like exhaust and earth. It was ugly, yes, but not hopeless. He could see it in his mind already. Not glass towers. Not luxury lofts. Just homes. Affordable, resilient. A model Henry would scoff at, and Irina would never touch. He was starting over. Not as someone's protege. Not as someone's lover. Just as a builder. And for the first time in months, his chest didn't feel hollow. The first foundation was poured on a rainy Tuesday. No fanfare, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no cameras. Just a rented cement mixer, a trio of soaked workers, and Elliot in a hoodie, holding blueprints like a man trying to summon faith from paper. His shoes sank into the mud as he paced the lot, water sloshing around the edges like it wanted to swallow the project whole. But something in him clicked that day, maybe it was the rain, maybe the silence. For the first time in years, he wasn't posturing for investors or performing in boardrooms. He was doing. And that felt sacred. The new project was deliberately modest, 20 duplexes, mixed income, environmentally conscious, built with local labor and no design flourishes that screamed for magazine covers. He named the development Harbor Rise, not for marketing, but because it was the opposite of everything he'd done before. It wasn't a monument to wealth. It was a shelter. At night, he worked alone in the borrowed trailer on site, sketching details, running numbers, rereading contracts. Jesse showed up occasionally with coffee and questions, but never demands. There were no midnight emails, no ultimatums, no Henry Van Specter looming in the spreadsheets. But silence from that world didn't last. 3 weeks into construction, Elliot got a text from his attorney, "You've been named in a civil action. Call me." He didn't need to guess who was behind it. The suit alleged misappropriation of funds from his old fund, vague enough to be inflammatory, strategic enough to scare away future lenders. Henry didn't want his money back. He wanted reputation, wanted Elliot to be radioactive, unban cable. That night, Elliot sat in the trailer staring at his old business card. Rivers Development Group. Black foil letters. The logo he once thought looked like royalty. He tore it in half. Then he called Irina. She answered on the third ring, voice soft but unreadable. "I thought I wouldn't hear from you again." "I'm being sued," he said. "By your old friend." There was a pause. Then, "I'm not with him." "I know." Another pause. "Then why did you call?" He hesitated. "Because I think this isn't just about me. I think he's going after you, too." She exhaled, and for a brief moment, the guard dropped. "He's freezing out the buyers on my commercial projects. Quietly. Blacklisting me to brokers. I haven't closed a deal in 2 months." "So we're both in his maze now," Elliot said. "No," she replied. "We were. Now we're liabilities." The line went quiet. Not heavy, just real. Like two soldiers on opposite ends of a scorched battlefield realizing the war didn't pick sides, it just used whoever was closest. "I'm not asking for help," Elliot said. "I just wanted you to know. I'm not running. Not anymore. You're building. Yes. Then I hope what you're building doesn't forget who you had to be to get there. By spring, Harbor Rise had roofs. Then walls. Families from the area started stopping by, asking questions. Elliot walked the site daily, answering them himself. He listened more than he spoke. He started recognizing names. He even hired 2 teenagers from the neighborhood to help clean the lots after school. He'd stopped chasing approval and started earning trust. But peace doesn't last forever. Not when power has a score to settle. On a gray morning in late April, Elliot opened the trailer door to find a manila envelope duct taped to it. Inside, photographs. Of him. At the site. At bars. In the hotel lobby. Jesse's name. Property records. And a handwritten note in neat, blue ink. Everyone's clean until the rain washes them. HV. The photos weren't threatening. They were surgical. Each image was mundane on the surface: Elliot shaking hands, Elliot at a zoning office, Elliot talking to a bank manager. But when arranged like a mosaic, they painted a picture Henry wanted others to see: Elliot still working the angles. Elliot with Jesse, a man rumored to have once laundered a land deal in Cicero. Elliot speaking to the same alderman currently under ethics review. It was enough to stoke doubt. Enough to whisper, "Look, he hasn't changed." Jesse read through the envelope and swore. "He's playing chess with our lives." "No," Elliot said quietly. "He's playing poker. Bluff and pressure." That same day, 2 investors pulled their soft commitments from the next phase of Harbor Rise. No one said it outright, but the implication was clear: Elliot was becoming toxic again. Irina reached out that night, unprompted. She stood outside the trailer, wind whipping her coat around her legs like a storm was rehearsing in the distance. She held no umbrella. She looked soaked through, but calm. "Do you want me to walk away?" she asked. Elliot stood in the doorway, unsure whether to invite her in or send her away. Would it matter? "Yes," she said. "Because this time I'm not working for him. I came to offer you something." "What?" "A path through this. Not around it, through." She handed him a flash drive. "I made backups," she said. "Of everything. Correspondence. Accounts. Meetings with Henry. What he paid for, what he ordered sabotaged. I kept receipts." "Why?" "Because part of me always knew he'd eventually eat me, too." Elliot stared at her for a long moment. "You loved him once." She didn't deny it. "I loved what he represented. Control. Precision. But Henry doesn't love people. He uses them. And when they think they're more than a function, he reminds them what pain feels like." "And what do you love now?" Elliot asked. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But I know what I regret." He took the flash drive. It took a week to go through everything. His lawyer choked on the first batch of emails, some of them damning enough to implicate Henry in manipulation of public officials, fraudulent shell investments, even coordinated pressure campaigns on media outlets to smear Elliot's name. There was enough to bury a reputation, if not a career. But Elliot hesitated. To go public would be to light a match in a field of dry grass. Yes, it would scorch Henry. But it would scorch Elliot too. Because the truth wasn't clean, it never is. He hadn't been innocent in everything. He'd closed his eyes during certain deals, trusted the wrong hand, profited off gray areas he chose not to question. Exposing Henry wouldn't make him a hero. It would just make him honest. And maybe that was enough. He didn't send it to the press. Instead, he sent it to Henry, anonymously, untraceably, with one line attached. "You taught me how to win. Now watch how I walk away." 3 weeks later, the civil suit was dropped. Quietly. No apology. No explanation. Just disappeared like a shadow after sunset. Elliot never heard from Henry again. Not directly. But the silence that followed felt like the last move of a master player who'd realized the game wasn't worth continuing if the opponent refused to flinch. Harbor Rise opened its doors in mid-July. The first family to move in was a single mother with 2 kids and a shy dog named Pepper. She hugged Elliot like he was a social worker, not a millionaire. He didn't correct her. He just smiled. On a late summer evening, Jesse, Elliot, and Irina sat on the roof of one of the units, legs dangling off the edge, the skyline distant and soft. "You ever think about what would have happened if we just stayed broke?" Jesse asked. Elliot chuckled. "We'd still be hungry. Irina looked out at the rows of modest homes, all glowing under the fading sun. But maybe we'd be hungrier for the right things. Elliot didn't reply. He was thinking of Henry, not with hate, not even with sadness. Just as a man who had taught him something vital. That wealth built on power corrodes, but wealth built on redemption endures. Summer softened into September. The kids rode bikes through the gravel lots. Muralists came in, not for pay, but for the love of the walls. The houses at Harbor Rise began to look lived in, porch lights blinking on at dusk, barbecue smoke curling upward on weekends, the faint echo of music through open windows. Elliot kept his office in the same trailer. It wasn't aesthetic. It wasn't inspiring. But it was real. He didn't chase magazine spreads anymore. Didn't care about awards. He measured success in noise, kids laughing, dogs barking, doors slamming open to let someone in. Then, one evening, a letter arrived. No envelope. No postmark. Just folded paper slipped under the trailer door like an old trick. When you first walked into my office, you reminded me of someone. Young. Impatient. Brilliant. Dangerous. I tried to mold you, then control you. That was my mistake. But your mistake was thinking you could walk away clean. You never walk away clean, Elliot. Not from me. HV. He read it 3 times. Then he tore it up without a word and threw it in the trash. Some ghosts talk just to hear themselves echo. 3 months later, Elliot stood at the back of a modest funeral. Henry Vance had died in his sleep. No scandal. No arrest. Just a quiet heart attack in his penthouse bathroom. The room was filled with suits and pearls and hollow eulogies. Elliot didn't speak. He simply watched as the man who once ruled his world was lowered into the ground with all the ceremony money could buy. Irina appeared beside him near the end. Her dress was black, but her eyes were dry. "Did you cry?" she asked. "No. Me neither." They didn't speak for a while. Just stood under the autumn sky, both wondering how someone so large could vanish into something so small. In the months that followed, Elliot kept building, but differently. He partnered with local unions. He hired former convicts. He stopped taking more than he needed. The new fund he created had no investors, only partners. He called it Foundry. Because the foundry is where you melt things down to remake them. Stronger. Purer. Less fragile than before. Years later, a young developer knocked on his trailer door. She looked eager. Eyes wide, hands shaking slightly as she held her pitch deck. Elliot let her speak, let her lay out the numbers, the angles, the dream. When she finished, she asked, "So, would you back me?" Elliot smiled. Not dismissively, gently. Like someone who had once asked the same question in a suit that didn't fit. "No," he said. "But I'll walk with you while you build." And in that moment, everything that had broken, mentor, lover, empire, ego, felt like it had broken in the right direction. Toward something whole.